Radio is an intimate storytelling medium, and when it bonds with one of the finest storytellers of our times, the result is sheer magic. During these times of social distancing, All India Radio hopes to bring you some comfort, some connection, with an exclusive story reading series, Bonding over the Radio. Coming up is the pick of the day, voiced by the author Ruskin Bond himself.
Copperfield in the jungle. Grandfather never hunted wild animals. He couldn't understand the pleasure some people obtained from killing the creatures of our forests. Birds and animals, he felt, had as much right to live as humans. At the age of 12, I did not have the same high principles as grandfather. Nevertheless, I disliked hunting because I found it rather boring. Uncle Henry and some of his sporting friends once took me on a shikar expedition into the jungles in the Schwalix near Dehradun. The prospect of a week in the jungle as camp follower to several adults with guns filled me with dismay. I knew that long, weary hours would be spent tramping behind these tall, professional-looking huntsmen who spoke in terms of bagging this tiger or that wild elephant, when all they ever got, if they were lucky, was a wild hare or a partridge. Tigers seemed only to come in the way of Jim Corbett. Well, this particular expedition proved to be no different from others. There were 4 men with guns, and at the end of the week, all that they had shot were 2 miserable, underweight wild fowl. But I managed, on our second day in the jungle, to be left behind in the rest house. And in the course of a morning's exploration of the old bungalow, I discovered a shelf of books half hidden in a corner of the back veranda. Who had left them there? A literary forest officer? A mem-sahib who had been bored by her husband's campfire boasting? Or someone who had no interest in the manly sport of slaughtering wild animals and had brought his library along to pass the time? He must have left it behind for others like him. Or possibly the poor fellow had gone into the jungle one day as a gesture to his more bloodthirsty companions, had been trampled on by an elephant or gored by a wild boar, or, more likely, accidentally shot by one of the shikaris, and his sorrowing friends had taken his remains away and left his books behind. Anyway, there they were, a shelf of some 30 volumes in different shapes, sizes, and colors. I wiped the thick dust off the covers and examined the titles. As my reading tastes had not yet been formed, I was willing to try anything. The bookshelf was varied in its contents, and my own interests have since remained fairly universal. On that second day in the forest rest house, I discovered P.G. Wodehouse and read his Love Among the Chickens, an early Euclid story and still one of my favorites. By the time the perspiring hunters came home in the evening, with their spent cartridges and impressive excuses, I had made a start with M.R. James's Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. This kept me awake most of the night, until the oil in the kerosene lamp was exhausted. Next morning, fresh and optimistic again, the shikaris set out for a different area, where they hoped to get a tiger. They had employed a party of villagers to beat the jungle, and all day I could hear the tom-toms throbbing in the distance. This did not prevent me from finishing M.R. James or discovering a little book called A Naturalist on the Prowl. It described the tremendous fun and interest to be had from studying the wildlife in one's own back garden. The grasshoppers, beetles, ants, butterflies, and praying mantises, all having such fascinating lives. Before I had finished the book, I was looking for spiders in the corners of the old bungalow and stalking grasshoppers in the long grass of the compound. My concentration was disturbed only once, when I looked up and saw a spotted deer crossing the open space in front of the house. The deer disappeared among the sal trees, and I returned to the veranda and my book. Dusk had fallen when I heard the party returning from the hunt. The hunters were talking loudly and seemed excited. Perhaps they had got their tiger. I put down my book and came out of the house to meet them. "Did you get the tiger?" I asked excitedly. No, laddie," said Uncle Henry. "I think we'll get it tomorrow. But you should have been with us. We saw a spotted deer." There were 3 days left, and I knew I would never get through the entire bookshelf. This I did not intend doing, as not all the authors on the shelf appealed to me. I chose at random The Jungle Book and David Copperfield. On the day I made the literary acquaintance of Mowgli the Wolf Boy, the shikaris shot the 2 wildfowl already mentioned. As the party had from the first intended living off the jungle, only some tinned foods had been brought along. But 2 lean birds were insufficient for a party of 5, and once again the meal consisted mostly of corned meat and mustard. Next day, while the grown-ups were looking for their tiger, and I was learning wisdom from the water rat, toad, and other river people of the wind in the willows, an event took place which disturbed my reading for a little while. I had noticed on the previous day that a number of stray dogs belonging to watchmen, villagers, and forest guards always hung about the house, waiting for scraps of food to be thrown away. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, a time when wild animals seldom come into the open, when I heard a sudden yelp in the clearing. Looking up, I saw a full-grown leopard making off into the jungle with one of the dogs held in its jaws. The leopard had either been driven towards the house by the beaters, or had watched the party leave the bungalow and decided to help itself to a meal. There was no one else about at the time. Since the dog was obviously dead within seconds of being seized, and the leopard had disappeared, I saw no point in raising an alarm, but returned to my book. It was getting late when the shikaris returned. They were dirty, sweaty, and as usual, disappointed. This time their excuses held a note of defiance. They took their corned meal in silence. Next day we were returned to civilization, so-called, and none of the hunters had anything to show for a week in the jungles. "No game left in these jungles," said the leading member of the party, famed for once having shot 2 man-eating tigers and a basking crocodile in rapid succession. "It's the weather," said another. "No rain at all this winter." "Don't know what the country's coming to," grumbled a third. "I saw a panther this morning," I said modestly. "A leopard." In fact, I was altogether too modest. I might just as well have said, "I saw a donkey this morning," for all the impression I made. "Did you really?" said the leading hunter. He glanced at the book lying beside me. "Young Master Copperfield says he saw a leopard." The others were only faintly amused. They did not have the energy to laugh. "Too imaginative for his age," said one of them. "Comes from reading so much, I suppose." "If you were to get out of the house and into the jungle a little," said Uncle Henry reproachfully, "you might really see a leopard." Don't know what young fellows are coming to these days. I went to bed early and left them to their tales of the good old days when rhinos, cheetahs, and possibly even the legendary phoenix was still available for slaughter. I came home with a poor reputation. My uncle's friends thought I was both a sissy and a liar. And Uncle Henry, poor man, seemed to think I was responsible for the failure of the entire expedition. he did not take me with him again. But grandfather, when I told him all about the hunt, doubled up with laughter and said he wished he had been with us only to see the faces of Uncle Henry and his friends. As a measure of his delight, he bought me a copy of David Copperfield, for I had not been able to finish the one in the forest rest house. I finally got through it in the banyan tree, in the company of several squirrels and a very noisy cicada.
Dr. Sanghamitra Devbhanj writes from Cuttack.
Yes,
And she watched you acting in Saath Khoon Maaf.
yes.
And she wants to know, how did it all happen and how has been your experience in acting?
Well, that happened by accident. Actually, at school, I was pretty good in school plays and that sort of thing. But Scottwood Marf, you see, I'd written this. It's based on a story of mine called Susanna's Seven Husbands. Vishal Bhardwaj bought the film rights for me. And then he said, would you like to do a small part in it? So I said, sure, I'd love to. So I had this little role of the priest who gives some advice to Susanna, and then he's there in just two short scenes in the film. And the actress was Priyanka Chopra, very beautiful and very talented. And in one scene, I had to give her a fatherly peck on the cheek. And I don't often get the chance to kiss beautiful ladies on the cheek. I was a bit nervous about it, and unfortunately knocked her glasses off in the process. She was wearing spectacles in the scene.
Next is Aryansh Pandey from Mumbai.
Aryan Pandey.
And he says, I've started planting trees on my own after I read your book on the cherry tree.
Oh,
I
nice.
presented in school as the character of Rakesh in my school book day, and I won the second prize.
Oh, wonderful. And Rakesh is here now, but he's now 46 years old. When he planted the cherry tree, he was 4 or 5. That was in another part of Mussoorie, but I believe the cherry tree is still there, and it's sheltering birds and other creatures.
Abhishek Goel is aged 21 and from Shimla. And he
Right.
says, I'm fortunate to grow up in a city where Bond grew up.
Yes.
And I'm luckier to go to a school which is perhaps the biggest rival to his school. And these kind of rivalries are common in old boys' schools.
Yes.
Yet it is a fact that every single Edwardian has read
Right.
at least one book written by a Cottonian who is none other than Mr. Bond.
Oh, that's nice to know.
And he says that he feels blessed to have been born in a generation where I can proudly say that during my time, Ruskin Bond used to write.
When I was at school in Simla, although I didn't study at St. Edward's, I did visit them with my school junior football team. And I have to confess that St. Edward's beat us 1-0.
That's what he says. These rivalries are so important.
Yes, right. They had a good football team.
Okay. Ananya Uberoy is 23. As a Delhiite, having moved to Madrid recently, tuning into the radio and listening to your stories during tea time here is my favorite part of the day.
Oh,
My
nice.
question to you is, what are your favorite things to do these days apart from writing?
Well, I'm still a great reader, so I'm always reading something or the other. And then I'm always checking out the kitchen and to see what Beena's making for lunch or dinner. Then I have a little garden. I grow geraniums and other flowers. It's not an outside garden because there's no land with the house, but it's a sunroom at one end of the building. And it's glassed in, so things grow there all the year round.
So Gauri Bhatt writes from Goa.
Yes.
What better way to go to bed than by being read a bedtime story by your favorite author? I have been a fan since I was a teenager, and my children have grown up reading your books. It's our bedtime routine now to end the day listening to you on radio.
Oh, thank you. And my stories helped you to go to sleep, so have a peaceful night and sweet dreams.
That was storyteller par excellence, Ruskin Bond, reading his hand-picked story of the day in our exclusive series, Bonding Over the Radio. A presentation of the Central English Features Unit. This came to you from the External Services Division of All India Radio.